So, good morning and welcome, everybody. And thank you for joining the Graduate Mentoring Center for our final in our three-part series on the Academy as Contemplative Practice. I'm Dr. Maria Hamilton Abegunde, the founding director for the Graduate Mentoring Center and a visiting faculty member in African American and African Diaspora Studies. Before I begin to share information about the center, about this series, and introduce our speaker, I'm going to invite us to just join together on this morning in a short practice, just breathing and just slowing down, because I'm sure that today, November 4th, 2020, that many of us have been rushing. Some of us may not have slept well. We may have other things on our mind. So I want to invite us to arrive fully into this offering of Dr. Rendon's for us today. And so I'm going to just ask you to stop whatever you're doing and take a breath, to just become aware of your breathing, of the space around you, the light around you, any sound around you. Breathing in deeply and exhaling. Inhaling again and exhaling. Inhaling again and exhaling. And just sensing this moment to be alive together. So thank you. A little about the Graduate Mentoring Center. First, I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Jennifer Park, our graduate assistant for the center. She is holding multiple duties this semester. So I want to thank her for all of her support and work in bringing things together for us. The center began in 2014 under the auspices of the President's Diversity Initiatives. And so we are part of recruitment and retainment, particularly for underrepresented minority students. We offer workshops and trainings for grad students, faculty, and staff, and use a mentoring model that is based in contemplative practices. And one of our core programs is the mentoring cohort that pairs a faculty member with a graduate student for the term of their degree or project, however that need is manifested. And we're guided by 5 tenets: balance, community, culture, mentorship, and scholarship, created from student responses to the question, what do you need? And it is our belief that our best scholarship can be created if we are able to access and sustain the first 4 tenets. So you may be asking yourself, why this series? Before I get there, I want to acknowledge and thank the Office of the Bicentennial and the Institute for Advanced Study for their financial support that allows us to invite our guests this year. I'd also like to thank the Institute in particular for its guidance and flexibility, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to reimagine what was possible since we couldn't gather 150 people who had committed to doing this work with us. And so I'm very grateful for them just giving the space and flexibility. The Academy is contemplative practice. This idea was born for me when I delivered the closing keynote for the inaugural Women of IU conference. My question to hundreds of women from all over IU: what if we used our workplace, our place of work, research, engagement as a contemplative practice? That is, a place where we envisioned our interactions with each other and our work as opportunities to reflect on our relationships and how they reshape our research, and how these relationships offer us the opportunity to change and transform our work and our understanding of the world and even ourselves. And the feedback I got from many of the women was that this was a scary question. So in typical form, as I tell people, of course, in seeing a scary question, I want to know more and I want to explore it even more. And so that's what I did. And because mentoring is all about building a relationship, this question remains central to the GMC's work. How do we use this space, right, as a contemplative practice? And what better way to do that for us than to invite members of various communities to share with us their thoughts on this topic in a rapidly changing world? And so each of our speakers have addressed the same question, although differently. Our first speaker was Dr. David Robinson Morris from Xavier University. Our second was Melissa Carter from NYU. And today I am really very happy and feel blessed and very privileged to have Dr. Laura Rendon with us. And so a little bit, just a little bit about our speaker today, just so you have an idea of what we are all going to engage in as a matter of practice and imagination. So Dr. Laura Rendon is Professor Emerita from University of Texas, San Antonio. As a nationally recognized speaker, her presentations focus on topics such as student success, Latinx STEM students, deep learning experiences, and self-care and healing. Dr. Rendon developed validation theory that is now used to frame research studies and programmatic activities. She is a teaching and learning thought leader in the field of contemplative education. She is the author of Sente Pensante, Sensing, Thinking, Pedagogy, Educating for Wholeness, Social Justice, and Liberation. And we are happy to be reading that book, some of us, to go along with this series. In 2019, the University of Southern California's Race and Equity Center recognized Dr. Rendon as one of the nation's most distinguished Latina scholars. She is a member of the board of directors of the John and Gardner Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education and a fellow of the Mind and Life Institute. And just on a personal note, I can tell you that she is an amazingly generous and compassionate being. I had opportunity to speak with her several times over the summer in thinking about this. And it is really a pleasure to welcome an elder into our space and to just be the benefits. So I welcome Dr. Rendon. She's going to share a short presentation with us. And from there, she and I will enter into a little bit of dialogue, but I invite you all also to put things in the chat and to consider some questions that you would like to ask, some comments, and then we'll have an open space where everybody will be able to participate. But if you have something that you just can't hold on to, you know what to do. So Dr. Rendon, welcome and thank you so very much.
Mil gracias, Abegonde, and buenos dias, everyone. It's great to be with you. Yesterday was a big day in the world and certainly in the United States, but 2020 has been quite the year as well. It seems like, we just, we think we're getting somewhere and all of a sudden, chaos comes in, disruption comes in. We've been through so much in 2020, and there's more to come. So anyway, it's an interesting time right now. What a time to be contemplative and to really sort through everything that's going on in the US and in the world. So let's have a good discussion this morning about contemplative practices and higher education. I want to begin by just offering a greeting. In the Mayan tradition, there's a beautiful term called in Lakesh, which means I am another you. And then across the world, there are very similar terms, which is very interesting. Ubuntu, the African term, I am because you are. And then the Indian greeting, namaste. And then the American Indian tradition, to all my relations, noting that we're all related. So it's interesting how throughout the world, this theme of connectedness and unity permeates throughout the world. So I was asked to reflect on what are contemplative practices. And I'm glad that you asked that question, Abegunde, because there's so much out there and so many different definitions. And as I reflected on it, on the question, I came up with my personal definition, and it's still in flux, it's still evolving. But at this point in my life, this is the best understanding that I have of contemplative practices. They're reflective experiences, and they are sometimes going to quiet, and at other times, they're going to shake up, they're going to stir our soul. And they activate our senses, they enhance understandings, they allow for greater insights and awakenings and transformation, and ultimately liberation. When we reflect, when we take the time to really sort through what's going on here, and we could come out of that struggle, begin to see things in a different way. Something begins to shift. We stop doing things that create harm and that don't work anymore. And so my colleague, Tejana colleague, Lorena Saldua, uh, thought about contemplative practices as a way for us to get in touch with our inner selves and to foster what she calls conocimiento. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Conocimiento, a higher level of enlightenment. And so we have the quiet kinds of contemplative practices, but even though they're quiet, they can still, stir us up. Like we're familiar with meditation, with prayer, silence, walking in nature, being in what one of my mentors, Angela Sarian, called the sweet territory of silence. And then there are those practices that certainly get us out there. And, we can be contemplative, for example, participating in protest marches. And we saw that. And certainly, I don't know how many of you participated in those. I wanted to, but I didn't for a number of reasons. But it seems to me that being there was probably such a memorable experience that people will remember for the rest of their lives. It stirred the soul. Again, those people who participated likely began to see things in different ways and began to act differently later on. But then we can also bear witness at places such as the Holocaust Museum, where we see the horrible things that happened, that hopefully we hope will never happen again. Visiting border communities, live close to the U.S. the Texas-Mexico border here close to San Antonio. I was born in Laredo, Texas, right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And so these issues become very important to me. Last May, I visited with the Gardner Institute, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, otherwise known as the Lynching Museum. Walking through that museum uh, certainly was a contemplative experience, but certainly, stirred us up, began to give the board members an opportunity to not just think about things, but to feel them, to really get in touch with what happened. Why did people do these kinds of terrible things to other human beings? And so, that's the best definition that I can come up with at this point in time in terms of contemplative practices. Coming back to conocimiento, Gloria Nasaldúa, and some of you may be familiar with her work, as she holds iconic status now in the Latina feminist scholarly community. But she talks about something called conocimiento. And so Gloria was writing back in the 1990s when we weren't really using contemplative so much. But she talks about moving, sometimes conocimiento, you can reach it in one day because you solve a problem and all of a sudden, aha, something comes to you that you begin to shift your thinking. Other things will take a long time. And those struggles that we have um, really allow us to learn. I mean, the pandemic is an example of this. There are terrible things in the pandemic, certainly, but there's also in the pandemic and in other situations that are very, very difficult to deal with, the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to all of a sudden begin to see things in a different way and begin to act in different ways. Um, so Azaldúa talks about 7 stages of conocimiento. Stage 1 is el arrebato. El arrebato is a loss of foundation where all of a sudden we're like, whoa, what happened here? And arrebatos can be uh, things such as the pandemic, that all of a sudden, the way I think of the pandemic, we were all walking along and suddenly, without any preparation, without anyone telling us, be careful, it was like we were all thrown off a cliff into a dark hole. And so that was a horrible loss of foundation. That's an arrebato. But there's other arrebatos in our lives, being diagnosed with an illness, being in an accident, losing someone we love. I mean, those are all different kinds of arrebatos. Life, unfortunately, is about suffering. It also has a lot of joy, and we can't forget that, but it does include suffering. And those moments of suffering, those moments of a loss of foundation, those moments of el arrebato, they allow us to really rethink what we do, really begin to look at things in a different way. Uh, so the second stage is nepantla, being in a liminal, in between space. With regard to the pandemic, right now we're in the middle of the old world as we knew it and the new world that is emerging before our very eyes. And that space creates a lot of tension because it's not a comfortable space, but it's also an opportunity to learn and to grow. Stage 3 is despair, where we might feel hopelessness, like, oh my God, what's going on here? But then as we're moving through the struggle, as we're moving through the arrebato, we begin to say, okay, I'm going to change some things. I'm going to, act and, really begin to adopt some strategies that are going to lead to a conversion. And then stage 5 is creating a pattern that speaks to your reality. We begin to script a new way that we're going to think and behave. And then we test those ideas in the world, knowing that some ideas will be met positively and some will not be met positively. And then, as a result of all of that, working through the struggle, we become transformed. We now are wiser. We really negotiate conflict in a different way. We work with others in a different way, and we grow as a human being, only to know that there are more arrebatos coming our way, more opportunities for growth, but also opportunities where we find ourselves in very difficult situations. So those are the 7 stages of conocimiento. Gloria believed that to access conocimiento, and she views this as a form of spiritual inquiry, that conocimiento could be reached via the creative arts. And so those are really the creative arts, or the contemplative arts, as I would say, such as writing, art, dancing, healing, teaching, meditation, and spiritual activism. And so she believes that all of this comes from opening all of our senses. As we do in our work, we create public acts. And so here are some examples of what I call estrategias de conocimiento, or illuminative knowledge tools that can foster contemplation and deep learning. And there are many, these are just some examples. Some people engage in autobiographical writing, contemplative photography. Art is fabulous in terms of contemplation, um, and feeling and thinking. Service learning with a reflective component. Being out in nature is certainly very, very contemplative moment. It gives us also moments of silence. Poetry. One of the things that the pandemic has done for me is to bring out my poetic voice, and hopefully we'll have time, a couple of minutes, for me to read a poem that I wrote. And then music, just also, very artistic, allow us to really engage more deeply in life, and visits to sites of social injustice. Just some examples. So Asaldúa begins, advocates, I should say, that as we work through our struggles, as we become transformed, there's these shifts that happen, the shift in our consciousness. And so she, differentiates between Descartes' view of I think, therefore I am, which is based on rationality and the mind, to Audre Lorde's I feel, therefore I can be free. So right now there are many experiences that allow for us to really engage in reflection and transformation. Some of them are personal and some of them are collective. Certainly the pandemic is a collective experience that we all are feeling it. We all are experiencing it. 9/11 was a collective experience. Um, the murder of George Floyd, those 8 minutes and 46 seconds of horror, as well as other murders. I remember watching the church event where Mr. Floyd was thought about, and just really uh, focusing on what happened. And at the end of that service, we were called to stand up, and I stood up as well at home for those 8 minutes and 46 seconds of deep reflection and learning. There's this family separation at the border taking place right now, the mass shootings that have happened in our society, of course, racism, and our own personal traumatic experiences. All of these open a space for reflection and transformation. The kinds of experiences that involve un arrebato, a loss of foundation, are associated with trauma. They're traumatic experiences. And as I begin to reflect on trauma, and I've been doing a lot of work because this is something that I want to get much more into. The other side of trauma is healing, and the other side of healing is trauma. And when we work with both of those components, then I think that can help us to become transformed. And it also acts in terms of um, liberating ourselves from some things that have not worked for us in the past and we didn't know how to get rid of them. But trauma and healing are there. They exist in dynamic oppositional complementarity. They're separate, yet they're together. Um, and so here are some examples of historical intergenerational trauma that the wounds I think are still with us. We need to heal that those heridas abiertas, those open wounds. About 100 years ago, we had the flu of 1918, and today it appears it's COVID-19. 400 or 500 years of slavery, or even more, it's racism, oppression, discrimination. We're now seeing modern day lynchings and murder and oppression of African Americans. We've seen the extermination of indigenous people. And today we've had Standing Rock impacting the water for the Sioux Reservation. We've seen the Holocaust and the internment of Japanese Americans. And today we see family separation at the border and holding people in cages. In the past, we saw the Great Depression. Today, we can see something similar with people in line, long lines at food banks, and so many people unemployed. So trauma is not just something that happens like at this moment. It has a history to it. It's intergenerational. And it calls for us to make some critical decisions about how are we going to heal these wounds and to really think about what's going on historically so that we can begin to not just reflect, but also to act in a different way to heal those wounds. And so as I reflected on all of this, yes, there's despair, but the other side of despair is hope. And the other side of hope is despair. When we work through those two pairs, then we see possibilities. So I think that despair is there to help, to allow us to look at hope as well, and to allow us to look at possibilities. So building that foundation for healing our wounds, for healing trauma, involves several things. And these are just some examples that come to my mind. In the indigenous tradition, it's about balancing our spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional dimensions. And we also need to cultivate our inner life skills, which is something that higher education has not focused on very, very well. And learning to really use conventional and alternative healing tools, connecting with our emotions. Robin Alfred says that there are 3 beats in healing. Reckoning is the first, where we come to terms with the issue. Remorse is the second, coming to terms with our feelings. And then restoration, where we have apologies, we go on a healing journey, etc. Then I think we need to embrace something called pluriversality, which is a fabulous word that I've learned. This is about avoiding either or thinking to embrace both and perspectives. And this is something that our society does quite a bit. And we've been colonized to thinking, we only have two alternatives: we do this or we do that. Um, and I think that the moment calls for us to be more spacious, to allow us to embrace more than one way, that we are, or two, that we look at the third and the fourth way, to remain curious and open about how two opposites actually complement each other. And so there are a number of other ways that we could heal, and we can talk about that during the discussion. Um, so I was also asked to reflect on the relationship between contemplative practice and the academy. And the first thing that came to mind is that the academy falls way short of anything contemplative, way, way short. It's decided that everything is about intellectual pursuits. Everything is about the mind. And don't get me wrong. I want students to be super, super smart, critical thinkers, problem solvers, phenomenal scientists and mathematicians. I am not against intellectual pursuits. What I am concerned about is that what we have now is very, very lopsided, because it's not all about the mind. We need to also look at other skills that help our students to become bridge builders, to become good, decent human beings, to be able to see injustices in our society. And so we need to build the competencies to help our students graduate with a more complete education, to help us to handle critical problems facing our society. In my book, Senti Pensante Pedagogy, I talk about Don Miguel Ruiz and his, the book, The Four Agreements. It really helped me to think about transformation more than any other book I've read. And he has a quote there: if we can see it is our agreements which rule our life, and we don't like the dream of life, we need to change the agreements. Now, I really had to read and reread and reread that statement, because he's speaking in a very spiritual way. But basically, what he's saying here is, and I'll turn this to higher education, if we can see that there are policies and narratives that rule higher education, and we don't like those policies and narratives, we need to change them. That's basically what this is. If we don't like certain things that people are saying we need to do this way, then we need to change them. If they're creating harm, we need to change them. And so what Don Miguel Ruiz says is that for him, in the spiritual tradition, there are four key agreements. Say what you mean, which is be authentic. Don't take anything personally. That's really hard to do. Don't make assumptions. I have to remind myself about that basically every single day. Always do your best. And then he issued another book later on: Be skeptical and listen with your heart. So, as I thought about the harmful agreements that are being held in mass consciousness in higher education, it's like we're walking along with this collective trend. They're not necessarily written down anywhere, but that's how entrenched they are. They don't really have to be written down. So for example, the agreement of monoculturalism, the almost exclusive validation of Western structures of knowledge, the agreement to privilege intellectual and rational knowing that prizes outer knowing at the expense of inner knowing, even when other intelligences exist. Daniel Goleman, for example, has spoken about and written about emotional intelligence, and there's musical intelligence, artistic, interpersonal. There's different forms of intelligence. But higher education has decided, no, let's just focus on intellectual, rational knowing. And then there's the agreement to focus on work, 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 and avoiding contemplation and avoiding introspection and self-examination. Um, it gets to the point that when we ask people, how are you? How are you doing? How often do we get the answer, oh my God, I feel great. I had time to do everything I wanted to do. Oh my goodness, this is such a great day. I mean, I feel so relaxed. I mean, hardly ever have I heard that. Instead, we get, oh, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm burned out, especially now when we've been asked to do so much more at a time of great chaos and uncertainty. And then there's the agreement of separation and detachment. This whole idea that faculty are seen as the only experts, that the students don't know anything, that we just, don't, no need to build connections with them, dismissing relationship-centered approaches. Those are some of higher education's agreements held in mass consciousness. And then I've also been reflecting on what kind of an education do we need to help students to address justice, fairness, and equity in our society. If we could take a magic wand and say that every student at Indiana University would have this competency or two or three competencies to deal with these issues, from climate change to, immigration, Black Lives Matter, the violence against people of color and against the GLBTQ plus community, religious intolerance, hate crimes of white supremacists. We have not, as a society, let alone higher education, come up with real solutions to these issues. Those wounds remain open, and those wounds are begging to be closed. If we don't close them in our generation, the next generation is going to have to deal with these wounds. I was at Bowdoin College 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I asked the faculty, in 20 years, what would you like your students to remember? And these are some of the things that they wrote down. They wanted the students to be active citizens, to remember how their gifts could be used in the world for the common good, to have a sense of self-wellness, to fall down and learn from failure, to have concern for a broader world, to be authentic, to pose relevant and meaningful questions, to be capable of learning complex things, and to be open-minded, to have critical thinking. And so the question is, if that is, and I think most everybody would agree with those, if not more, but if that's what we want from our students, and these are all noble goals, I'm totally in agreement with them. What are we doing in our classrooms to foster these kinds of ways of being in the world? What are we doing? And people start, having nervous laughter because they know that they're kind of not focusing on those things, even though those are the most important things. So I think higher education needs to think about the student outcomes, the competencies that students need to have to function in a world of chaos, in a world of uncertainty, but also in a world of love, in a world of caring, in a world of compassion. And so these are some of the competencies that came to my mind as I began to really think about what is it that students would need to have to help us with these kinds of issues. Deep self-knowledge, pluriversality, moving beyond either or to embracing both and perspectives, building community, critical consciousness, empathy, compassion, appreciating and working with diversity, self-care, healing, and well-being, connectedness, presence, and having a sense of meaning and purpose. These are some of the competencies. I think you can add others, and we can open the discussion for that. But I think that we really need to, as a community of higher education, of educators in general, I should say, because this begins in K-12, to really begin to explore what kinds of activities and what would we want to see in the curriculum and in our pedagogy to help students to develop these particular competencies. And sometimes people ask me about the term senti pensante, and I got the term from Eduardo Galeano's book. It's called The Book of Embraces. And in that book is this beautiful passage called The Celebration of the Marriage of Heart and Mind. Why does one write if not to put one's pieces together? From the moment that we enter school or church, education chops us into pieces. It teaches us to divorce soul from body and mind from heart. The fishermen of the Colombian coast must be learned doctors of ethics and morality, for they invented the word senti pensante, feeling, thinking, to define a language that speaks the truth. And so, senti pensante is really a term from the fishermen of the Colombian coast. Orlando Falsborda, who's a Colombian researcher, was doing ethnographic research with the fishermen. They don't have the education that you and I have, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything. They knew when to fish. They knew the sun. They knew the moon. They knew the currents. And they fished. And they told Falsborda, somos sentipensantes. We use our minds and we use our intuition to figure things out and to figure out fishing. So I use the term sentipensante, and I thank the fishermen of the Colombian coast for their ways of knowing that have really helped me move forward in my own reflections about holistic teaching and learning. So here we are, the day after a huge election. I think we're being called and called over and over again to wake up. Despierta, wake up, wake up. And so higher education, I think, also needs to wake up. We need to be at our best with our open minds, open eyes, open ears, open hearts, and wake up. So let me stop talking here, and I, I, I will stop sharing and open it up for questions. So I hope I didn't go on and on. So
Oh.
I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so very much. You could have continued to go on and on. There is so much here. And I am very full. And so what I'd like to do is I really only have maybe one or two questions for you in particular. And then I'd like to just open it up to the floor. To talk. And at that point, as I've shared before, we usually do stop recording unless people want to continue recording and to have that. But it's my practice to stop recording at the Q&A section to allow us to speak. But thank you so very much for all of that and for going to the heart of everything. You've answered every question, not only that I asked, I put out for you, but that I would have asked. And so I think that you've given us a lot to think about. What has been fascinating for me is that each of the speakers that we've had have spoken about the the contemplative practices in the form of the spiritual work and activism that we need to do, right? That is the work that needs to be done in changing the nature of how we understand the academy and what's in the academy, which is why it's a frightening question to ask: how can the academy be a site of contemplative practice? But they've also spoken about the need to unlearn things, right, that we have learned and that we have been indoctrinated with. Also the idea of the epistemological and ontological violence that the academy has done in terms of creating these agreements or anything else that we do and how we understand our relationships with each other. And so you've addressed, some of that, and I know that people have questions and comments, so I'm going to limit mine. The question that I have for you is, given all of that and given this work, and I love that it is the fishermen, like people who feed us, people who are in alignment and movement with the sea and with the sky and with climate, right? People who have to rely on intuition, but science and everything else, right? That does not get seen. Um, What was your aha moment? What was your aha moment in your life in your teaching and creating that you said, "Oh, there's something else, and that I need to create something else." And how did you go about then creating it or building community to create it? What was that aha moment? What did it feel like? And how long did it take you to move from aha, that period of shock, into the place of creating and transformation?
Well, I'm still creating and transforming. I think that that's something that is hopefully never ending, because I think that we need to keep growing. And but looking back, it was in my 40s. I was at Arizona State University, and I felt that I was getting sick. I mean, I felt that um, just something was just not right. And I used to tell my friends, I want to be a better person. And that was an interesting comment, because um, why would I be saying something like that? It's not that I was a horrible person, but I wanted to be a better person. And the other thing that happened in my life was that some of my friends had passed away at an early age. From my friend Raul, who died of AIDS in 1991, when it didn't need to happen. My friend Juan died at 50 of heart attack, and my friend Leticia died of colon cancer at age 44. And I thought, there needs to be a better way. And I just felt something stirring in my soul as well. And around that time is when I became a fellow of the Fetzer Institute, and had this phenomenal set of experiences with a group of people that were struggling just like me, but they weren't all educators. They were doing different things in their lives, from a producer at NPR to a physician at the Harvard Medical School, to a K-12 teacher. I mean, there were different professions represented, but we all felt that there needed to be a better way, and so we engaged in about a 3-year fellowship. We weren't together all the time, but we would meet 3 times a year, and we would have a lot of conversations. And our mentor was Angeles Arian, the author of The Fourfold Way. We learned so much, from, I mean, it's just an experience that I wish everybody could have, but that certainly, really began to shift my thinking. And I began to read a lot. And so my project at the time was to bring these issues to the academy. So Senti Pensante Pedagogy is really the culmination of my project as a fellow of the Fetzer Institute. Um, so that was basically it. That I wanted to be a better person. I saw people around me that were hurt, and I knew that something needed to change. And then all of a sudden, these things came to me. I took advantage of them, and today I can tell you that yes, I am a better person, and still growing. But I don't have that question anymore.
Thank you so much. And then just one last one before I turn it, invite everybody to participate. The agreements that the unspoken, the agreements, the embedded, almost embodied agreements within the academy that people hold. For you at this moment in time, what would you say in terms of creating a new agreement? If we were to unlearn these, undo them, deconstruct them, what would you say at this particular moment in time might be a new agreement that would be important, or a place to start at this moment in time, a new agreement?
Well, that's a very, very good question, because there are many agreements, but It's just something that immediately came to mind was it's related to a talk that I gave last week at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And they told me that they were in the process, or they had, even the board of trustees had signed on to this, which I thought, wow, that they wanted to create an anti-racist university. That was their goal. And so, as you asked that question, um, something that came to me was the agreement to create an anti-racist university. And what would that look like? What would that look like? What would be its components? Um, and we had a conversation also about how, because some people were very skeptical, of course, of that. Like, oh, no, I don't really believe this is going to happen, you know. And so, uh, and certainly I can see that skepticism. On the other hand, I also have to remind myself that there are things that have happened in the world that I thought that I would never see in my lifetime. You know, for example, gay marriage. I thought I would never see that, in my lifetime. And so we need to just be bold and audacious at times, like AOC would say in New York, to really propose some things that are can be viewed as revolutionary and disruptive, but that are in fact going. If we don't struggle through these issues that make people feel uncomfortable, we're never going to get to where we need to go. And so I think that's another agreement, that we're going to struggle through the questions. See, it's not important what Laura Rendon thinks you should do or what's in my book. The important thing is, as Rilke would say, to be patient with all that is unresolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves. And that's what's important, working through those questions, because it's about our own growth and our collective growth. So I'm going to work through those questions in a different way that you will, but at some point there's going to be some convergence and some give and take, and then we're going to move through. So I think, unfortunately, and this is related to this whole notion of either or, that we have to see the world as either or, and that can be another agreement, the agreement to work with a pluriversal consciousness, that we're not going to just focus on either or. We're going to be spacious. We're going to see the third, fourth, and fifth way. So those are some of the agreements that come to mind.
Thank you so much. And I think that is a perfect place for us to take a pause. I want to invite you, because I know you wanted to share a poem with us, and I'd like to invite you to please share that poem with us as a way for us to bring this portion to a close, and then we'll enter the next portion.
And
So,
I can stay with you for a little bit longer. Okay.
yes,
So
yeah.
let's,
Mhm.
if you would like for me to do so, I can certainly do that.
Absolutely, because I know that people have questions.
Yes, yes. All right. So this is a poem that I wrote back in March, when we were beginning to feel the chaos of the time, the uncertainty of the time. And we weren't sure what was going on. There was a strangeness going on in our bodies. We felt a little depressed. And so we're still struggling. And although I think we've learned a lot from that, but it's still time, I think, to I tell students, be gentle with yourselves. I mean, you're dealing with trauma here, and so don't be so hard on yourself. Um, but as I thought about what was happening, as I was reading some spiritual work, um, there's also something magical going on, which is a realm shift. So here's the point. And so it is that we are now being forced to do what we could not imagine doing before. Abruptly, almost without warning, and with our old outworn practices and belief systems, we find ourselves entering a total shift of realms. It is time to evoke the wisdom of our ancestors, philosophers, and sage prophets. Ansaldúa, she would say, that we are now living in Nepantla, in liminality, straddling the old and the new normal. Atwood would admonish that truth is not irrelevant. Indigenous people would remind us that the universe is an inseparable whole. Mamá, she would say, ten mucho cuidado, mija, no salgas. All precious wisdom. The virus, the fear, the uncertainty, the chilling tales of other nations have migrated to us. An unfamiliar strangeness has taken over our bodies. Every day begins to feel like a week, even a month, some say. Yes, the virus kills and fear creates chaos. But it is at precisely these moments of extreme crisis that our human spirit presents itself in uniquely soft, endearing ways. Light, hope, community, sacredness. It's in the balconies of Italy and Spain that burst with song. It's in the women who are sewing homemade face masks for doctors. In the 2-minute prayer requesting a miracle recited at the same time across the world. In the parents who choose to eat dinner every night in the hallway close to their quarantined daughter. In the people who set up Christmas lights and cook Thanksgiving dinner in March. In ordinary people who read children's stories online, in virtual watch parties and happy hours with friends, in the first responders who risked their lives to save others, in the priests who walked the streets of Laredo to offer comfort and blessings. Let us remember that darkness can bring forth our finest hour. In this realm shift, we come to know that a new reality is in store for us, a reordered promised land, as Luther King would call it. Now we learn that the I is about the we. And those who are coming behind us will surely ask the questions of the heart. How did we cope? What did we not get right? What did we learn? Is it really true that we can isolate in our togetherness, socially distance to save our relationships, work in a context of uncertainty, confusion, and fear, and yet find a sense of stability? Break open from our rigidity to find a new foundation for humanity? I have hope that we can, as Rilke suggests, to live the questions now as we stumble into the vast territory of answers that defy a choice between one or two options. I have hope that in this realm shift, we will journey to reconnect with the things that really matter: our humanity, our communities, our loved ones, our sense of purpose in this life, to find our perfect centeredness in a shifting reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Dr. Rendon, it is our pleasure to again welcome you and to have this time with you. And so thank you.